Welcome to Students Incorporated, a podcast exploring the topics of business, education, technology, and design. I'm your host, Mr. Jason. Join me weekly as my team and I produce content that's informative, positive, fun, and uplifting. Episodes include student conversations, interviews with thought leaders, and inspirational stories with an international flavor. This podcast is created and produced with the help of students from the International Community School of Bangkok. Hello, I'm Mr. Jason, and I'll be your host today. We've titled this episode, How to Make a Podcast. I've always been fascinated in the behind-the-scenes operations of making things, the things we see, hear, and use every day. Whether it's our favorite product, a TV show, or the behind-the-scenes look in the kitchen of a famous restaurant. It's fun to get a glimpse behind the curtain and see how things are done or made. So for this episode, we thought we'd give you a behind-the-scenes look into how we make a podcast episode. But before we get into our process, let's hear our quote of the day and get some headline news.
Our quote of the day comes from Sam Ewing, who says, "Hard work spotlights the character of people. Some turn up their sleeves, some turn up their noses, and some don't turn up at all." This quote talks about the impact of hard work on people's character. It suggests that when faced with a challenging task, individuals will respond in different ways. In the context of behind-the-scenes work, it implies that a person's true character will be revealed through their actions. Good results come from a strong work ethic, a willingness to contribute, and the ability to recognize the value of every task, whether that task is seen by everyone. And that's our quote of the day.
For our headline news, we are going to talk about several popular podcast shows. Starting off in first place is the Joe Rogan Experience. This show averages around 11 million listeners for each episode. This show focuses on interviewing a wide array of high-profile guests that incorporates the host Joe Rogan's commentary. Notable guests that have been on the show include billionaire Elon Musk, U.S. senators, and famous astrophysicists. Joe describes himself as a stand-up comic, mixed martial arts fanatic, psychedelic adventurer, and performs both nationally and internationally. Place is Crime Junkie, a true crime podcast covering the frequent cases of missing people, serial killers, and murder. Hosted by two best friends, Flower and Prawat, there is a crime-unrelated segment at the end titled Puppet of the Month, telling the stories of adopted dogs, inspired by fans online who sent in photos. Crime Junkie has been on tour to 4 cities and was nominated for Podcast of the Year and Best Crime Podcast Awards in the iHeartRadio Podcast Award. And finally, we have the show called The Daily, a podcast produced by the well-known American newspaper, The New York Times, which is hosted by journalists Michael and Sabrina. This show produces 5 episodes each week, and each episode lasts for about 20 minutes. The Daily covers real-time news while exploring its nuances and perspective in depth. Additionally, The Daily is recognized as the Webby Voice of the Year.
In this first segment, we'll introduce the different roles of our production team and talk about a typical episode production sequence. Most listeners never get to see what happens the days and weeks preceding up to a specific episode's release. So we thought we'd explain the process of how to make a podcast. I've got the entire Season 2 podcast team in the studio today. So to get us started, I've asked our team to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their role and what they do. Let's start with our administrator and designer, Chania.
Hi everyone, my name is Chania, and like Mr. Jason said, I fill the role of the team as an administrator and designer. As an administrator, my role is to lead progress meetings at the beginning of class. In our progress meetings, we talk about updates, reminders, and to-dos for our podcast. Sometimes we take this time to discuss potential episode ideas, make Instagram stories, and tackle podcasts and scheduling issues. As for my role as a graphic designer, I create episode graphics for our podcast. Each episode consists of 2 graphic versions, one for posts in general and one that is like a banner for the TV entrance in front of school.
Hi everyone, I'm Premi, and I'm not only one of the 2 co-hosts, but I'm also the main editor for the podcast.
As co-host, I'm honored with the opportunity to interview our guests and read over segments of each episode, like the headline news and sometimes the quote of the day or the PSA. As a writer or editor, I come up with guiding questions for our guests and I look over each script to ensure they're great and ready to go.
Hi there, I'm Yanhao and I serve as both the tech engineer and the journalist, and I also help research and gather news for our news segments. As the tech engineer, I'm there for the recordings where I monitor the sound quality and level in order to make sure that there are no problems with the audio and help set up equipment from time to time. For the journalist job, I mainly just find news headlines that are relevant to each episode.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I am one of the regular co-hosts of our podcast team, and I'm honored to interview and learn from our amazing guests. In addition to that, I'm also the team's co-editor, helping to find and write the quote of the day, writing public service announcements, PSA, for the team, and will be involved in writing the guiding questions in the future.
As you can see, and for our particular context and podcast structure, it takes a team to produce each episode. We have a specific structure we follow for each episode. Doing this helps to build listener trust and expectations. We designed our structure to be consistent and repeatable so our listeners know what to expect and when to expect it. So this is one of the foundational things that's important when doing a podcast. Keep a consistent structure and outline for each episode. Not only will your team know what to work on for each episode, but your listeners will know what to expect when they tune in. My next question for the team is, what episode do you think our listeners should definitely go back and listen to? Let's start with Premi this time.
The first episode that came to mind for sure would be episode 39. That's the one we did with Mrs. Anisha on marketing. She's the absolute expert on marketing and everything to do with that field, and beyond even. She gave out great and insightful advice, and I learned so many things from her. I remember sitting right here interviewing her awestruck, so she's definitely a super role model for me.
I highly recommend episode 44, USC Cinematic Arts Film and Television Production. It was our first time interviewing ICS alumni online. It was a great experience for us because it allows us to experience different ways of interviewing people, not only in person but also through Zoom. Personally, as a Marvel fan, I admire Mr. Coleman's journey and his experience meeting with the film's directors and one of the actors in Marvel, Josh Brolin. In this episode, you will get a glimpse into life as a filmmaker and photographer in LA. You will also learn a lot from his transfer from ICS to George Fox University.
I would recommend episode 40, which is the one involving the ICS Student Council, because it highlights many of the responsibilities that the Student Council shoulders, and also some behind the scenes of school events that listeners might find interesting. It really shows the work that our students do to make sure our school gets to have such community building events.
Just like Premi, I think listeners should definitely go back and listen to the episode with Miss Anisha on marketing journey and success. I personally felt like this episode was the most inspiring and interesting. From this episode, you'll be able to hear valuable advice on what really defines success and how Anisha's journey has shaped her as a person. I find it super motivational listening to her experiences and how she handles obstacles.
Yeah, check out all our past episodes. We've produced over 50 episodes so far between our Season 1 and Season 2 teams, and most of the content is not time sensitive, meaning it was relevant then and it's still relevant today. My next question for the team is, what's one favorite memory you have from behind the scenes so far? Rebecca, why don't you start us off this time?
My favorite behind-the-scenes moment was the live chapel show with the former NFL player Asa Watson. To promote this live episode, I enjoyed doing interview trivia with high school students in Media Center and setting up the stage before the actual live show and mock interviewing Patience when she played as Asa Watson.
Mine probably also has to be the live chapel recording, since it was interesting to set up the stage and look at all the preparations from the sound booth and then celebrate with everyone afterwards.
I absolutely agree with both Rebecca and Yanhao. My favorite behind-the-scene moment was definitely the live chapel podcast with Asa Watson. I thought it was really fun setting up the stage, like what Rebecca said, and I also really liked going over the script before the actual live audience. It was a really interesting experience to have.
My favorite moment, like everyone else, would also be the live chapel recording. It was super exciting, and getting to interview him in front of the entire student body and the setup was really fun too. And also the time after that too. I remember It was a day one, so we had class afterwards, and so that entire class we went out to celebrate, and we also did a vlog. We also vlogged ourselves celebrating, and we also talked about like the different future projects and strategies, and we also interviewed everyone on their ratings for each simple coffee drink that they got. It was super fun.
Thank you so much for sharing those. My next question has two parts to it. What are some of the challenges you have faced so far this season, and how have you overcome those challenges? Yenhao, let's start with you this time.
The main challenges that have arose would be finding up to date news that's also relevant to some episodes, because some of them don't have much media coverage or any significance that events that happen. So what you do basically is just try to find something that's related to that topic, or go back even further so that the problem is it's not as relevant to present day, but like you have to make amends. And as a tech engineer, there aren't that many challenges, since everything's going as it should, and that's a good thing.
I think like when I was asked this question, the first thing that came to mind would be not having enough people on our team. And we've had 5 student team members last semester, excluding Mr. Jason, but now we're down to 4. I think losing 20% of the team was especially hard at the beginning, it has already been hard since like the beginning of the season, because I think as a team we really do invest in the podcast, and we would love to see it go a long way. And we've had brilliant ideas in every class as well, whether that's like more marketing strategies for the podcast, expanding our content and mediums, finding merchandise or stickers, creating website, and so many more projects. But I think the one thing that gets overlooked while we have like all these like brilliant ideas all the time is that while we're trying to balance and coordinate all of that, we still have to plan, invite guests, interview them, write, record, publish an episode every single week. So I think like that would be the biggest challenge. There would be perhaps the amount of people that we don't have, and then that factors into the time that we could have had more. But okay, side note, everyone sign up for marketing. The ways in which we've overcome this, I think, would be by working efficiently and being organized in the things that we have to do, the deadlines that we have to meet. And Chania, our wonderful administrator, helps us keep on track with the progress meetings, and I think that really helps. And I think also like over the year, we've definitely bonded and connected through these struggles, and we've celebrated our struggles together, right? Like the live chapel. And so cheering each other on is definitely an integral part in overcoming these challenges.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me as a graphic designer is coming up with an interesting and captivating title that fits in the margins of the text box graphic for the episodes. Some titles were too long and could not fit, and others were too short and filled up the space in an awkward way. I've been able to overcome this challenge through asking for suggestions and help from my teammates and Mr. Jason, as well as experimenting with how small images on the design could fill up some of the space.
The challenges I encountered in my role as a co-host were planning my time and responding to the guest responses. At first, I was very rusty in the role. I still remember once I was super busy that day, and I forgot that there was an interview after school, so I went home right after the last bell. So I missed that important interview. Since that, I've started using a calendar to keep track of my interview dates so I don't forget. Another challenge is responding to get the guest's responses. Whenever I ask a question, I need to give feedback on the guest's response instead of jumping straight to the next question. This is something I deliberately drill on top of each interview.
Okay, thank you everybody. One last question before we take a quick break from our mid-episode PSA. What's one thing you could tell our listeners about the podcast? It can be anything. Premi, let's start with you.
All right, the obvious answer is to listen. That's one thing I'd love to tell our listeners about the podcast. Keep listening. In all seriousness, though, I'd like to add that we love to hear from you all. So, we'd love to see you engaged, and we love any and all feedback from you. So reach out to us through emails, Instagram, Spotify, whatever streaming platform you're on, and share your thoughts. Show your voice, after all, because your voice matters.
My answer is simple. Don't stop listening. You never know what valuable lessons and advice you'll hear. Who knows? You might not hear these things anywhere else but here.
Every episode is full of nutrients that we can learn from and benefit from, not only academically but in life. Our guests are absolutely amazing people in all aspects of their lives, who have studied hard in high school and college and worked hard in life. They give us a quick glimpse into their professional lives and lessons learned. If you missed any of our episodes, it would be your loss. So we encourage you to check out each of the episodes and see what you can take away from them.
While the podcast does focus mainly on business and tech, there are also numerous other topics that have been covered. Whether you're planning on becoming a scientist or a businessman, I'm sure that Students Incorporated offers you valuable information from at least some of the episodes.
And that ends our Q&A time for our first segment. Don't go away because we'll be right back after this short PSA announcement.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Premi here. This announcement goes out to all ICS high school students. SALT trips are coming up next week. This is a time to serve others outside of the classroom, in different communities around Thailand. You get to work hard and play hard with your friends, fellow classmates, and your teachers. When we do this together, we learn the joy of service and hard work. It gets us out of our comfort zones and exposes us to new communities that we are unfamiliar with. So enjoy the manual labor and educational times spent with students from other high schools.
We are back with part 2 of our behind-the-scenes look at how to create and produce a podcast. To help you understand how big this worldwide industry is, we've gathered a few stats that will help put this digital medium into context. According to Spotify, there are over 5 million podcasts worldwide, with a total of over 70 million episodes between them. My team's going to share some more stats about this unique digital medium.
According to Statistica, by the end of 2024, there may be over 500 million regular podcast listeners worldwide.
It's also estimated that worldwide podcasting market will be worth $30 billion by the end of 2024.
Spotify and Apple are the two most popular listening platforms, and together they control over 61% of the podcast streaming market.
This means that 61% of the 500 million podcast listeners are worldwide are using Spotify or Apple or both.
Thank you so much for those stats. Now back to the question of how do you make a podcast? In order to ask this question, we thought we'd talk to you about how we do it here at Students Incorporated. I would venture to say that most podcasters do something similar in terms of the process, but there are lots of small details that probably vary from show to show. To help us out and to spell out this process, we put together a general process list similar to the way we do things here at Students Incorporated. So if starting a podcast is something you want to try in the future, take note. Janya will talk about what we do first.
The first and most obvious thing you need to decide is what your podcast topics will be about. In order to figure that out, you need to know what you like to talk about and what type of guests you might be able to invite. Doing this will help you with the second item on our list.
After you've thought about the type of topics and guests you'll invite on the podcast, you can then narrow down your target audience or listeners.
Once you have your topics and target listening groups, you'll need to design the episode outline and structure. This episode outline and structure should also include an average length and follow the frequency of releases as designated by the team.
Next, you and your team need to incorporate a podcast format that works best for not only your team, but for your listeners as well. Here are 5 popular podcast formats many podcasters are using today. 1. The interview format, which is interviewing a guest or guests. 2. The conversational format, which is basically a conversation among 2 or more people about a specific topic. 3. The educational format, which is about educational content that teaches the listeners. 4. Solo or monologue format, which is basically the host carrying the entire show. And 5. Non-fiction storytelling or news format, which is basically just heavy editing that makes stories come to life. Okay, on to our next item, Chanyo.
This item is a lot of fun because it involves giving your show a personality and look. So next, you'll need to give your show a name and create branding elements such as a logo, color schemes, maybe a website with other content. This also involves what type of personality and music or extra audio components will be added to the show. On to our next item with Premi again.
The next part of the process is something I'm heavily involved with because I'm the Season 2 editor. It is to plan episode scripts and interview questions. This process takes a bit of time and energy because each episode needs to be scripted out properly in order to stay in format and length. Rebecca has the next item on the list.
Okay, next you have to set up the podcast production space and the production process with your team members. To do this, designate a space where the recording will happen. And if you are bringing guests into that space, make sure that space is inviting, cozy, fun, and professional looking, keeping with your brand. Yanhao, what's next?
Next is the recording of the show. Make sure you have 1 or 2 high-quality microphones that are connected to a recording device. The microphones could be connected directly to a computer, or they could be connected to a mixer first. Either way, you'll want to capture the audio in the best way possible. Also, don't forget to take photos and videos during the recording process. The extra content can be used for other things like marketing and social media. Now, moving on to what happens after recording of the episode. Tanya, what's next?
The next step in the process is the editing and post-production of the recording. This is more technical in nature as you'll need to use editing software to take out any unwanted pauses or retakes during the recording. You'll also want to do some digital enhancing of the audio clips along with adding in extra elements such as the intro and outro along with any music or sound effects. Once you're done editing, you'll want to save that file in the MP3 audio format. This file format retains higher quality sound but also helps keep the file size smaller. Premi, what's next in the process?
Okay, so after post-production, it's time to release your episode to the world. Releasing it is all about distribution. Choose a distribution method that best fits your process and pocketbook. If you choose to go to the free route, then you'll have to learn how to create an RSS file and then how to distribute that file to all the platforms you want to be a part of. You'll also need to upload that MP3 audio file to a web server somewhere. However, the alternative to all that is more simple and straightforward. That is to use a podcast hosting and distribution platform that makes the entire process so much easier. There are many of these platforms out there and their pricing varies, so make sure you do your homework first before committing. Students Incorporated uses RSS.com because we are affiliated with an educational institution. We were able to get an educational discount. Okay, Rebecca, what happens after you launch an episode?
Now that you've released an episode, it's time to promote the show. This can be done through traditional marketing means or through word of mouth, social media, website, or by being a guest on another person's podcast. There are many ways to promote your show. You'll just have to find what works best for you and your audience. Think multi-channel promotion, meaning you'll want to promote your show through multiple channels, not just one. Okay, last but not least, Yanhao, what's next?
The final part of this process is often overlooked. It is to repurpose episode content in the form of other distribution mediums. This could be video on YouTube, Reels on Instagram, or other social media platforms. You could also convert each episode transcript into an article or blog post to be used on your website. Be creative and repurpose your content as it will add longevity to your episode.
And there you have it. That's the magic formula. For this episode, we incorporated the educational format and led with the topic, how to make a podcast. However, for the majority of our other episodes, we incorporate the interview format. As you can see, it's not rocket science, but there is a process that needs to be followed. This process helps the entire team stay on task and schedule. With that said, and as we start closing out this segment, I'd like to ask a few questions of my team that will also help answer the question, how to make a podcast. My first question, I'll direct to Premi, one of our regular co-hosts. So Premi, what do you think are some of the most important aspects of an episode?
I think one of the most important aspects of an episode would be content. We work really hard to find and deliver content that we trust and hope would resonate with listeners, as well as provide insights and advice that you'd love. I think the rule that most go by as well would be that quality content matters.
My next question is for our other regular co-host, Rebecca. What are some skills you feel are needed for podcasting? And then, how can a person improve on those skills?
The skills I feel that are needed for podcasting is knowing how to record your sounds correctly and deliver helpful messages to your audience, such as how to turn on the microphone, where to speak on the microphone, and asking questions that will actually help the audience learn from the interview. Another important skill for podcasters is summarizing the guest's points and asking follow-up questions to better understand the message they're trying to convey. A person can improve these skills by practicing consistently. This can help them become familiar and accustomed to the various facilities as well as interviewing others. As co-editor, I also encourage people to read more news articles and listen to more podcasts for more inspiration and information.
Thank you. My next question is for Yenhao. What are some of the technical aspects that are involved in producing a podcast and its episodes?
Each class involves a lot of discussion about new podcast topics, briefings, and basically just a bunch of work. Since the podcast involves many different guests, it's crucial that Student Incorporated maintains a good relationship and image with its collaborators, while also making sure that all the tasks for each episode are fulfilled.
My last question is for Chania. There are so many different kinds of podcasts out there. Our show is quite unique as well because it is produced by a marketing class I teach. How do you think the team has applied the theoretical knowledge you have learned in class to the practical action of producing a season of the Students Incorporated podcast?
Our team has applied our knowledge of marketing into a lot of the foundations of our podcast design, content, and blogs. The importance of understanding our audience has driven us to focus on certain topics like education, design, and technology. Plus, our understanding of having consistency is also applied in our podcast theme and color scheme.
Okay, that ends our last segment. Before we sign off, are there any final words of advice you'd like to share to anyone who's thinking about getting into podcasting or some form of show producing?
I would encourage them to explore. I think not specific to just podcasting, but applicable in any other field would be to explore and to encourage yourself to determine what your interests are or where your passions lie. From then on, I would advise them to keep exploring and finding more information. Another thing I would like to add would be keep listening to podcasts like ours. As a writer, the advice I get most often from professional writers is to read. They tell me that the best way to get better at something is to learn directly from the source. So if you're interested in the field of podcasting or some form of show producing, then keep listening to podcasts and keep listening to show productions and in the topics that interest you and the topics that challenge you. Keep pushing forward. You've got this. Keep exploring and keep dreaming.
Podcasting is a very enjoyable thing in life. You get to connect with more people in the world from different backgrounds, different professions, and different lives. We can really see the greatness of God through each person. It reminds me of how powerful and profound God is in our lives. Whenever I interview people, I am reminded that we are spreading God's glory in every aspect of our lives. My advice to you is to find something you love to do, something you are passionate about, and do what you can to glorify God's name, so you can share your testimony and journey with others around the world through our podcast, and encourage others to find what they are passionate about by giving them a glimpse into your life.
Even if it's for something casual, I think that podcasting, even if it's by yourself, is a fun thing to do. Having people listen to you speak gives you an opportunity to voice your thoughts and also engage with others meaningfully. It also gives you the opportunity to network and pick up new skills required to promote and enhance your podcast that will definitely help you in any future endeavors.
I would say go for it. It's a fun experience that not only allows you to practice communicating and speaking on a microphone, but also one where you can learn valuable insights and information from many different guests and their perspective. Going into podcasting is a really good learning process. You'll practice many important qualities, especially in teamwork and effective work management. Like always, the outcome of your hard work is always rewarded when you go back and listen to it.
Thank you, team. I hope our listeners found this episode to be full of practical advice as we answer the question, how to make a podcast. Now it's on you to go out and try it. Feel free to reach out to us anytime with questions or ideas. You can do this by sending us an email to studentsinc.podcast@gmail.com or by sending us a message through our Instagram account, which is under the name @StudentsIncorporated. As we end this episode, I just want to say thank you to all our regular listeners out there. We appreciate your continued support. Feel free to share our show and pass the word to a friend or a colleague, someone you think may enjoy our podcast. And as always, this podcast would not be possible without the hard work and support of our international student production team.
All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com, a vibrant community of creatives sharing copyright-free images, videos, and music.
And we are signing off until next time. We are Students Incorporated, because your voice matters.